But I want to bring on Rod Dreher first, because it's something I really want to talk to him about. He's a senior editor at the American Conservative. He's written and edited for just about everybody: New York Post, National Review, Washington Times. He's been published in the Wall Street Journal, where I read him all the time. He's appeared everywhere, and now he's appearing here, and has been profiled in the New Yorker. He wrote the New York Times bestseller, The Benedict Option, a strategy for Christians in a post-Christian nation. And you can find him on Twitter at Roddreher. Rod Dreher. Rod, you there?
I'm here.
Hey, it's nice to meet you. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. I've wanted to talk to you for a long time, because we talk a lot on this show about a sort of cultural federalism, about the fact that if all our values are collapsing everywhere, maybe the only way we can fight back is by kind of establishing our own communities and defending our own communities from the onslaught of the federal government. And you've kind of put this in a Christian context to some degree. But I want to start at the very beginning with this, because it's called The Benedict Option, a strategy for Christians in a post-Christian nation. Is this a post-Christian nation?
It absolutely is. And by post-Christian, I don't mean that there are no Christians anywhere. Clearly, there are plenty of Christians all over. What I mean by post-Christian is that the nation doesn't understand biblical Christianity as the foundation for how we understand our politics, our morals, and so on and so forth. If you look at the statistics that sociologists have been bringing forth about the millennial generation, there's been a tremendous fall off in religious identification, even religious understanding among that generation. And I think that we are headed straight to the secularism that is already prevalent in Europe and Canada. It's not just me saying that, Andrew. It's the two top sociologists of religion said that America can no longer be thought of as a counterexample to the secularization thesis. So what I propose is that we Christians, and I am a Christian myself, not panic about this, but wake up and realize the seriousness of the situation we're in, and take what I hope will be effective measures to preserving the faith in a hostile secular country.
Okay, and I'm going to get back to that in just a second. But before I do, why do you think this happened? What went wrong? I mean, it's so obvious. It's so obvious that our values, our laws, our ideas are informed by Christianity. I mean, one of the things that led me to Christ was kind of understanding how central it was to everything that I believed was true and how it underpinned that. How do we lose that argument?
Well, that's whole books have been written about that. But I think the key thing was the Enlightenment, which was a deliberate attempt to sever the roots of Western culture from Christianity for the sake of liberating the individual. Now, a lot of the men who founded the Enlightenment, the philosophers and so on, also men who founded our country, were, if not Christians necessarily, at least deists, and they recognized that there had to be, that the social order, the political order had to be rooted in something transcendent. For us, this was the Christian faith. Well, 250 years on, we have depleted that understanding, and now we have come to the point in our culture, and even in a lot of churches, I hate to say, where our religion and our public ethos worships the autonomous self. And I saw this really interesting thing the other day. Someone had one of those Google Ngrams where they go back and search books to see over the past 300 years to see how often certain words appear in those books. The word rights appears like 4 or 5 times as often as the word duties appears in books written since the 1960s. What does that tell you?
Yeah. Okay, I know I'm taking you through this slowly, but I actually want to get your whole vision here.
Sure.
When you look at the country, when you look at your daily life, what do you think the worst effect is of having lost the underpinning of Christianity? What do you think the worst effects? What are the things that bug you? Just real life, everyday things.
Yeah, well, I live most of my life online because I write for a living, and that right there is a sign of modernity too. Even though I try to be a traditionalist, I'm as modern as anybody else in that regard. But my wife is a teacher, and she teaches in a Christian school, and I talk to a lot of different teachers, both in Christian schools and public schools, and the lack of a moral center among kids today. The idea that they believe that their purpose in life is to be happy. and that they are owed certain things. This is not the country we started out in. This is not the country that my father, who was born in the 30s and who lived through the Depression, this isn't the country he helped to build. But I think that there's so many things, not just the education system, but our entire consumer economy and the consumerist ethos teaches us to think that the purpose in life is to freely choose the things that make us happy, not necessarily the things that are right. And this plays out in so many different ways. I'll tell you, too, this might sound crotchety, but I see it as a real problem for us going forward. Every time I go to colleges to speak, at Christian colleges too, the number one thing that the professors tell me that they see the kids struggling with, addiction to pornography. It comes through the smartphones that I'm seeing even in conservative Christian communities, parents handing their kids. And they come to think that this is part of the moral ecology, having access to smartphones. I see a lot of parents undermining the sort of things that they want their churches and the schools to teach their kids, but they're undermining it themselves by this uncritical acceptance of technology.
Yeah, and I mean, it really isn't crotchety, because it's not just a question of saying, oh, that's naughty. It really is so destructive to people, and it's an addiction, and it destroys people's sex lives, which is ironic, but there it is. So what's the Benedict option? What does it mean?
Well, this philosopher, Alistair MacIntyre, contemporary philosopher, said back in the 1980s that we in the West have lost our moral center, and this is why we are going further and further apart. He said that we are living a lot like the late Roman times, at the time when the Roman Empire fell. Interestingly enough, Cardinal Ratzinger, just before he became Pope Benedict, said the same thing. Anyway, MacIntyre said that we await a new and doubtless very different St. Benedict. Well, who was St. Benedict? He was a Roman Christian, a layman, who born around the year 500, who went down to the city of Rome to get his education. The empire had collapsed. The barbarians were ruling Rome. He saw it was so decadent and chaotic that he withdrew from the city, moved out to the woods, and founded some monasteries. He didn't try to make Rome great again or save Roman civilization. He just wanted to serve God in community as best he could in very difficult times. 200 or 300 years after he died, the spread of Benedict's monasteries had helped preach the gospel to the barbarian tribes, to re-civilize Western Europe, and to lay the foundations for the refounding of Western civilization. What I say today is we have to look around. We Christians, we traditionalist Christians, have to look around at the chaos and the collapse around us and start doing what St. Benedict did. We're not called to head for the hills or build monasteries. We're lay people, but we have to start strengthening our local communities in churches and schools and in other institutions to give ourselves the strength to carry the faith and to carry the Western tradition through this dark age of chaos that's coming upon us.
What does that look like in real life? I mean, what would you like to see Christians doing exactly?
Well, in my book, The Benedict Option, I profiled several different various Christian communities, Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox Christian, who are doing forms of this. My favorite one, the one that I think realizes it most completely, is an Italian community in a city on the Adriatic. They're all Catholics, very faithful Catholics, but they're not angry about it. They can read the signs of the times and see how things are falling apart, but they also realize that they have to come together, as they've done, to build a school, a classical school, to educate their kids. They also come together as a community for Bible study, and also for events like sporting events, community gardening, things like that. And they are building the thick community that they're going to need to hold on to the faith amid all these different currents that's separating us from each other, and families from each other, and people from their churches. I think some form of that, you can't franchise this, but some form of that, where we make the community, the church in most people's cases, but also schools, classical Christian schools and neighborhoods, the focus of our lives in much the same way that modern Orthodox Jews do. That will give us the strength to go out into the world as we are called to do without losing our moral grounding and our faith. At least that's the hope.
But But when you bring up Orthodox Jews and the Amish and people like that who live in communities that essentially they sort of reject modernity itself, which I think is a hard sell because modernity has so many wonders in it. It really is. But part of it, I actually believe, is the inheritance of Christianity, that our science and our cures and our things that we basically Christ showed us we could do, if we went forward. So we don't want to lose. I personally don't want to lose modernity in making sure that I preserve what's worth preserving.
Right. And you're right. We can't lose modernity because this is the air we breathe. It's the water we swim in. And I'm not attracted myself to the life of the Hasidim or the Amish. I mentioned the modern Orthodox Jews who are active in the world and present in the world, but they live their lives in such a way through fasting, through prayer, and through communal identification that make them resilient out in the world. They can present themselves as faithful Jews in the world because the things they do in their private lives and communally within the Jewish community strengthen their identification as Jews. I think we Christians have a lot to learn from them.
Really interesting. I'm out of time, but I want to ask you just one last question. Do you think we are at the end of the American empire? I mean, or do you think this is the fall of Rome?
Yeah, I do. Okay. I don't know how long it'll take, Andrew, and it doesn't make me happy to say that, but I don't see how we hold it together. The forces pulling us apart, pulling us away from our faith and our traditions and each other are immensely strong. And I, as a Christian, I hope to encourage my fellow Christians to do what it takes to hold on and to survive this. And not only to survive this, but to thrive in the chaos that's to come and to help others outside our communities to come in and to find peace and light and order and love and healing within the churches.
That's really interesting. Rod Dreher of The American Conservative, the author of The Benedict Option, A Strategy for Christians in a Post-Christian Nation. Find him on Twitter at RODDREHER. Anywhere else people should look for you?
At my blog at theamericanconservative.com and theamericanconservative.com/Dreher.
Great. Rod, it's really nice talking to you. I hope to do it again.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks a lot.